I had worked at Hayes Technologies for 7 years. I started as an intern, stayed late, missed birthdays, missed holidays, built my entire life around that company and around Rachel Morgan, my girlfriend, my manager, the woman I planned to marry. For 7 years, my world had been surprisingly simple. Work hard, get promoted, build a future, eventually marry Rachel. I thought everything was moving exactly as planned. I was wrong, because sometimes your entire life changes because of one piece of paper. It happened on a Monday. I arrived early as usual, coffee in one hand, laptop in the other. The office was still quiet. Most employees hadn't arrived yet. I greeted the receptionist. She smiled nervously. I didn't think much of it. I walked toward my office, then stopped. An envelope sat neatly on my desk. White, official, stamped with the company logo. I frowned. Nobody left documents there before I arrived. I placed my coffee down, opened the envelope, and felt my stomach drop. Transfer order. I blinked, then read it again. Remote branch assignment. Mountain Province Operations Division. Effective immediately. Location: 943 miles away. Duration: indefinite. I stared at the paper, then read it a third time. This had to be a mistake. I had just completed our biggest project. My department exceeded every target. I was due for a promotion, not exile. I looked around. The office suddenly felt strange. Then I heard footsteps. I looked up. Rachel stood near my door, and beside her stood Ethan Brooks, her assistant, 29 years old, smart, ambitious, always smiling, and for reasons I could never explain. I never liked him. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Actually, both of them did. I held up the transfer order. What is this? Neither answered. I looked at Rachel. Is this real? She swallowed, then nodded slightly. Silence. I waited for an explanation. None came. I looked at Ethan, then back at Rachel. Finally, I asked one question. Did you know about this? Silence. Rachel lowered her eyes. That alone was enough. Because silence is an answer. She knew. She had known. Maybe for days. Maybe for weeks. And she never told me. Something unpleasant settled in my chest. I looked at Ethan. He suddenly laughed. Not loudly. Just a short laugh. But it was enough. I turned toward him slowly. He quickly cleared his throat. Sorry. No, he wasn't. People laugh because something is funny. And somehow, my transfer amused him. I stared at him, then looked at Rachel. She seemed nervous. Why? Because I was upset? Or because Ethan laughed? I couldn't tell. I held up the document. Who approved this? Rachel looked away again. Ethan answered. Upper management. I frowned. I didn't ask you. Silence. He smiled politely, the kind of smile that somehow felt insulting. Rachel finally spoke. The company needs someone experienced there. I blinked. Me? She nodded. I almost laughed. The company suddenly needed me. After 7 years at headquarters? After my promotion discussions? After promising I would lead the new division? None of it made sense. I looked at her carefully. You support this decision? Another silence. Then, a small nod. Something cracked inside me. Not dramatically, quietly, because disappointment rarely arrives loudly. Sometimes, it simply settles inside you. I looked at the transfer order again. Mountain Province, 943 miles away. Effective immediately. I looked back at Rachel. When were you planning to tell me? She didn't answer. I repeated myself. When? Finally, she whispered. Today. I almost smiled. How considerate. I had lived with her for 3 years. We ate breakfast together every morning, slept in the same apartment, planned our future, and somehow, she couldn't mention I was being transferred across the country. I suddenly felt tired, very tired. Ethan spoke again. It's actually a great opportunity. I looked at him. He smiled. Remote branches often lead to promotions. I stared at him, then asked quietly, do you always answer questions nobody asks you? His smile disappeared. Good. Rachel sighed. Can we talk privately? I looked at her, then at Ethan. He didn't move. Interesting. I smiled slightly. No. She blinked. What? No. I placed a transfer order on my desk. Whatever you need to say can apparently be said in front of him. Neither spoke. The silence became uncomfortable. I suddenly noticed something. Rachel and Ethan stood surprisingly close together. Close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe not. I looked at both of them, then remembered something strange. Lately, Rachel worked late constantly. Ethan stayed late too. Business trips, extra meetings, weekend presentations. I never questioned it, because I trusted her. Now, I wasn't sure why. Rachel stepped forward. You know this doesn't change anything between us. I looked at her, then at the transfer order, then back at her. 943 miles away. Indefinite duration. And apparently, that changed nothing. I nodded slowly. I see. She looked relieved. That confused me. Why did she look relieved? Like she expected me to argue, or get angry, or refuse. Instead, I simply picked up the transfer order, folded it carefully, placed it inside my bag, then looked at both of them. The office felt strangely quiet, like something important had just happened. Maybe it had. I looked at Rachel one final time, then at Ethan, and suddenly, I realized something. The transfer order wasn't the problem. The problem was that both of them looked guilty. And guilty people usually know something you don't. I smiled politely. When do I leave? Neither answered immediately. Then Ethan quietly said, tomorrow morning. Silence. I looked at him, then at Rachel. Tomorrow. They had known, and neither of them told me. I slowly nodded. For some reason, that hurt more than the transfer itself. Because sometimes, the people who betray you don't use knives. They use silence. And somehow, that cuts deeper. Finally, Ethan stopped laughing. It was my prank. I stared at him. He smiled proudly. I wanted to see your reaction. Silence. I looked at him, then at the transfer order in my hand, then back at him. I honestly thought I had misunderstood. You what? He chuckled. The transfer order isn't real. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. I made it. Silence. I blinked. Someone had forged official company documents, used company letterheads, placed them on my desk, made me believe my entire life was changing. And somehow, this man thought it was funny. I looked at Rachel. She sighed. It's not real. Ignore him. Ignore him? I frowned. I'm sorry. She crossed her arms. Ethan was just joking. I looked at her, then at Ethan, then back at her. Neither looked upset. Neither looked embarrassed. Neither looked like they had done anything wrong. I suddenly felt like I was the strange one. Ethan smiled again. Honestly, your face was priceless. Several people nearby laughed softly. Apparently, they had been watching me read the document, watching me panic, watching me ask questions. Entertainment. That's what this was. I slowly placed the paper on my desk. You forged company documents. Ethan shrugged. It was harmless. Harmless. Interesting word. I looked at Rachel again. Surely she would say something. Tell him he crossed the line. Tell him to apologize. Tell everyone this wasn't appropriate. Instead, she smiled slightly. You're taking this too seriously. Silence. I looked at her, really looked at her, because suddenly, I wasn't sure I recognized the woman standing in front of me. She looked relaxed, almost amused, as if I was the one behaving strangely. That sentence hurt more than the prank itself. You're taking this too seriously. Because she didn't protect me. She joined him. I remembered all the times I defended her. Every office rumor, every criticism, every difficult project. I always stood beside her, without hesitation. And today, she stood beside someone mocking me. I swallowed. For some reason, my throat felt tight. Ethan laughed again. Come on, don't look so upset. I looked at him. You thought this was funny? He nodded. Obviously. Silence. I just wanted to see what you'd do. I stared at him, then asked quietly, and if I had a panic attack? He blinked. What? If I had medical problems? Silence. If I had family obligations? More silence. What exactly was the funny part? He looked uncomfortable. Good, because for the first time, he actually seemed to be thinking. Rachel sighed again. You're making this dramatic. I turned toward her. Am I? She frowned. Yes. I looked around. Employees had stopped pretending to work. Everyone was listening, watching, waiting. One woman quickly looked away when I noticed her. Another man pretended to organize papers. The office suddenly felt very small, very crowded, very strange. I looked back at Rachel. You knew about this? She hesitated, then nodded. Interesting. How long? Since this morning? I almost laughed. So, she had watched too. She knew, and said nothing. I looked at Ethan. You asked her first? He smiled awkwardly. Yeah. And she agreed? Neither answered. That was answer enough. I nodded slowly. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is loud. This feeling was different. Quiet. Cold. Like something slowly switching off. Rachel stepped closer. You're overreacting. I looked at her. No. She frowned. Yes, you are. I shook my head. I'm really not. Silence. Because suddenly, everything seemed extremely clear. The transfer order wasn't important. The prank wasn't important. Even Ethan wasn't important. What mattered was learning where I stood. I looked at Rachel. If someone embarrassed her publicly, I would defend her immediately. If someone humiliated her, I would stop it immediately. If someone intentionally upset her, I would never laugh. Never. Yet here she was, watching, smiling, telling me to relax. That realization hurt. Because sometimes, the people we love accidentally reveal exactly how much they value us. And usually, it's during moments when they think nobody is paying attention. Ethan suddenly smiled again. So we're good. I looked at him. He genuinely expected me to laugh. I almost admired his confidence. I picked up the fake transfer order, folded it carefully, placed it inside my bag. Rachel blinked. What are you doing? Keeping it. Why? I thought for a moment, then answered honestly. So I remember this day. Silence. Neither of them spoke. I looked at Rachel. She seemed confused. I looked at Ethan. He looked uncomfortable again. Good. Then I smiled politely. I should get back to work. Rachel frowned. That's it. I nodded. That's it. She looked irritated, almost disappointed. Maybe she expected an argument. Maybe she expected anger. Maybe she wanted me to fight. Instead, I sat down, opened my laptop, and started answering emails. Nobody moved. The office remained strangely quiet. Finally, people slowly returned to work. Conversations resumed. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. Life continued. But something had changed. For the first time, I felt completely alone inside a room full of familiar faces. And strangely, that loneliness felt like the beginning of something. I just didn't know what yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Beside me, Rachel slept peacefully, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't laughed while someone humiliated me. The apartment was completely quiet, except my mind wouldn't stop. I replayed everything. The fake transfer order, Ethan's laughter, my coworkers watching, Rachel smiling. You're taking this too seriously. The sentence repeated over and over. Eventually, I sat up. The clock read 2:17 a.m. I walked into the living room, then sat on the couch. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. Why did the prank bother me so much? At first, I thought it was embarrassment. Nobody enjoys being humiliated. But that wasn't it. Then I thought maybe it was anger. No, I wasn't angry anymore. I sat there for nearly an hour. Then suddenly, I understood. The prank hurt because nobody there respected me anymore. Not Ethan, not my coworkers, not even Rachel. The transfer order wasn't real, but the disrespect was. That was what hurt. I thought about the last few years. How often Ethan interrupted me during meetings. How often coworkers joked at my expense. How often my opinions were ignored. I remembered Rachel canceling our plans because Ethan needed help with a presentation. I remembered office parties where people automatically included Ethan in conversations and somehow forgot I was there. I remembered birthdays, anniversaries, late nights at work, moments when I felt strangely invisible. I had ignored everything, made excuses, told myself I was imagining things. But suddenly, everything made sense. Respect isn't lost in one day. It's lost slowly, little by little, until one morning, someone can hand you fake transfer papers and laugh in your face. And nobody thinks it's wrong. I looked toward the bedroom. Rachel was still sleeping. I should have felt sad. Instead, I felt calm, very calm. For the first time in years, I saw my life clearly. I had built everything around other people. The company, the relationship, the expectations. I stayed late because I wanted approval. Worked weekends because I wanted recognition. Ignored my own needs because I wanted a future with Rachel. And somehow, I ended up becoming someone everyone took for granted. I looked out the window. The city was dark, quiet. Then a strange thought appeared. What if I left? Not emotionally. Actually left. The idea surprised me. Then it stayed. Mountain province. 943 miles away. Fresh start. New people. No memories. No Ethan. No Rachel. No office where everyone thought humiliating me was funny. I laughed softly, because suddenly, the fake transfer didn't seem terrible at all. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had made a decision. I arrived at work earlier than usual. The office was nearly empty. I walked directly to human resources. The woman behind the desk smiled. Good morning. Morning. What can I help you with? I placed a document on her desk. She looked down, then blinked. Transfer request. I nodded. She looked confused. Mountain Province branch. I nodded again. Silence. You mean? She looked at me carefully. The prank. It's not a prank anymore. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I smiled slightly. Very. She looked genuinely shocked. I signed the paperwork, filled out forms, answered questions, then left. By 10 o'clock, the entire office knew. Apparently, news travels extremely quickly. I was reviewing emails when someone stopped beside my desk. Rachel. She looked confused and nervous. Can we talk? I looked up. Sure. She held a paper in her hand. My transfer request. This is a joke, right? No. Silence. She stared at me. You're actually requesting a transfer? Yes. To Mountain Province? Yes. She blinked several times, then laughed nervously. Okay. Silence. I waited. She smiled. Very funny. I looked at her. I'm not joking. The smile disappeared. For several seconds, she simply stared. You can't be serious. I smiled. I've never been more serious. Silence. People nearby had stopped working. Everyone was listening. Rachel lowered her voice. Why would you do this? I thought about it, then answered honestly. Because I want to. She looked completely lost. No. She shook her head. Because of yesterday? I didn't answer. Her expression changed. Oh my God. She sighed heavily. You're still upset. I almost laughed. She still didn't understand. This wasn't about being upset. This was about understanding something important. I looked at her. For 7 years, I gave everything to this company. She remained silent. I missed holidays. She said nothing. I missed birthdays. Silence. I built my entire life here. She looked uncomfortable. I smiled slightly. And yesterday I realized something. What? I held her gaze. Nobody here would do the same for me. Silence. Absolute silence. She looked hurt, then confused, then something else. Fear. I stood, picked up my coffee, then looked at her one final time. 4 years. Every major decision I made involved someone else's happiness. The company. Rachel. Everyone except myself. For the first time in years, I chose myself, and strangely, it felt like freedom. I smiled politely. Excuse me. Then I walked away, leaving Rachel standing alone beside my desk, still holding the transfer papers, and looking at me like she no longer recognized the man in front of her. The company approved my request surprisingly fast. Actually, too fast. I submitted the paperwork on Monday. By Wednesday afternoon, I received an email. Transfer approved. Reporting date. Friday. I stared at the screen. 7 years. 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of overtime. 7 years of sacrificing pieces of my life for that company. And it took them less than 48 hours to send me away. I should have been angry. Instead, I laughed. Because sometimes reality is so obvious that anger becomes unnecessary. I closed my laptop, looked around my office, and realized something. Nothing here actually belonged to me. The desk, the computer, the office, even the people. I had simply borrowed all of it. And now, it was time to leave. That evening, I returned to the apartment. I pulled an old suitcase from the closet, then another, and another. For a long time, I simply stood there. 3 years. 3 years living in this place with Rachel. 3 years of ordinary moments. Movie nights, late dinners, arguments over whose turn it was to wash dishes, conversations about marriage, children, a future, funny, You could spend years building a life. And then one day, you start putting it into boxes. I packed quietly. Books, clothes, documents. The apartment slowly looked emptier. At around 8 o'clock, someone knocked. I already knew who it was. I opened the door. Rachel stood outside. She looked beautiful as always. But something about her expression felt strange. She wasn't sad. She wasn't worried. She looked annoyed. She walked inside, then looked around. Boxes, suitcases, packed shelves, the empty bookcase. Silence. She folded her arms. This has gone too far. I looked up. I'm moving. I can see that. Silence. She sighed. Seriously, what are you doing? I placed another book into a box. Packing. Don't do that. I almost smiled. She said it like she was asking me not to buy the wrong groceries. Not change my entire life. I looked at her. I'm leaving on Friday. No. She shook her head. I mean this. I waited. She sighed again. You're acting ridiculous. Silence. Because of one stupid prank? No. I smiled sadly. Because it showed me something. She frowned. What? I looked around the apartment. Then at her. That I've been staying somewhere I don't belong. She blinked. What does that even mean? I didn't answer immediately. Because honestly, I wasn't sure I could explain it. How do you explain disappointment? How do you explain slowly realizing that the people around you don't value you the way you value them? How do you explain feeling lonely while standing beside someone you love? I looked at her. They laughed. She frowned. What? They laughed at me. Silence. Ethan laughed. She remained quiet. My co-workers laughed. Still quiet. You smiled. Her expression changed. I wasn't laughing at you. No. I nodded slowly. You were laughing with him. Silence. I barely smiled. I stared at her. That was her defense. Not. I'm sorry. Not. I shouldn't have done that. Not. I understand why you're hurt. Just. I barely smiled. I suddenly felt tired again. Very tired. She stepped closer. This isn't worth throwing your life away. I looked at her. My life. Yes. She gestured around us. The company. Your career. Everything. I smiled slightly. You know what's funny? She frowned. I built my entire life around things that would replace me in 2 days. Silence. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. The company approved my transfer immediately. The office continued working. Meetings continued. Projects continued. Life continued. As if I had never been there. I picked up another box. Rachel watched quietly. Then she said something softer. I think you're angry. I looked at her. For a long moment. I said nothing. Then I shook my head. No. She looked confused. I'm disappointed. Silence. There is a difference. She stared at me. Because she didn't understand. Nobody did. They thought I was leaving because I was upset. I wasn't. I was leaving because I finally understood something. You can forgive disrespect. But once you see it clearly, you can never unsee it. I lifted the final box. The apartment suddenly looked different. Half empty. Like a chapter already ending. I walked toward the door. Rachel followed. You really mean this? I nodded. She looked almost irritated. Like I was being difficult. As if she still expected me to laugh and unpack everything. We reached my car. I placed the box inside. Closed the trunk. Then turned around. Rachel stood beside the building entrance. Arms folded. Face serious. You'll come back in a month. Silence. I know you. I looked at her. She continued. You'll get bored. Silence. You'll miss everyone. Silence. You'll come home. I almost smiled. Because she sounded so certain. As if I had no choice. As if I would always return. As if I would always stay available. The same way she assumed I would tolerate being disrespected. The same way she assumed I would always understand. Always forgive. Always wait. I looked at her quietly. Then looked at the apartment behind her. 3 years. Then at the city around us. 7 years. Finally, I looked back at Rachel. I didn't answer. Because deep down, I already knew something she didn't. I wasn't moving away from the company. I wasn't moving away from the city. I wasn't even moving away from her. I was moving away from a version of myself that kept accepting less than he deserved. And that man was never coming back. The mountain branch was small. Actually, small was being generous. The building looked like it belonged in another decade. The paint was fading. The carpets were old. The sign outside had a broken letter. When I first arrived, I stood in the parking lot and stared. This was it. The place nobody wanted. The office everyone joked about. The branch where careers supposedly disappeared. A middle-aged security guard smiled at me. "You must be the transfer from headquarters." I nodded. He extended his hand. "Welcome." I shook it. His smile seemed genuine. I wasn't used to that anymore. Inside, the office looked even smaller. 12 employees. One manager. 3 departments sharing the same floor. No private offices. No fancy conference rooms. No expensive decorations. Nothing impressive. And somehow, I liked it immediately. The branch manager introduced herself. Her name was Linda Chun. Early 40s. Sharp eyes. Firm handshake. She smiled warmly. I heard headquarters finally remembered we exist. I laughed. She smiled. Good. Apparently, people laughed here without trying to hurt anyone. She showed me around. Small accounting department. Tiny sales team. A break room barely large enough for 6 people. Then she shrugged. "We don't have much." I looked around. "I think it's enough." She smiled again. I had no idea how right I was. The first few weeks felt strange. Nobody asked about office politics. Nobody wanted gossip. Nobody cared who I used to work with. Nobody cared about Rachel. Nobody cared about Ethan. People only cared about one thing. Could I do my job? That was it. No hidden agendas. No games. No competition for attention. Just work. Simple. Quiet. Honest. On my 3rd day, I stayed late. Habit. I expected everyone else to leave. Instead, 3 people remained. One was fixing spreadsheets. Another was preparing reports. Someone else was making coffee. I looked confused. A young accountant noticed. "You staying late too?" I nodded. She smiled. "Okay." Then she returned to work. No speeches. No pretending to be busy. No office performance. Just people doing their jobs. For some reason, I smiled. Weeks passed. Then months. I learned everyone's names. Their families. Their favorite foods. The receptionist baked cookies every Friday. Someone brought fruit from their farm. People shared lunch. They celebrated birthdays. They actually listened when someone spoke. I kept waiting for the hidden catch. There wasn't one. The branch had problems. Many problems. Outdated systems. Poor organization. Unfinished projects. Weak client relationships. But people cared. And caring changes everything. I started making improvements. Nothing dramatic. Small changes. Better scheduling. Clearer communication. New project tracking. Training programs. Simple things. The employees embraced every idea. Nobody said, "That's not my responsibility." Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody tried taking credit. Instead, they worked. Together. 3 months later, our numbers improved. 6 months later, profits increased. By the end of the year, we had our most successful quarter in branch history. The head office finally noticed. Linda walked into my office one afternoon holding a report. She looked amused. "We're famous." I laughed. "Already?" She handed me the report. I stared. Revenue growth. Project completion rates. Customer satisfaction. Everything had improved. Significantly. I looked up. "This is impossible." She smiled. "No." She looked around the office. "This is what happens when people feel appreciated." Silence. I looked at the report again. Then around the branch. Maybe she was right. Back at headquarters, everyone protected themselves. Here, everyone protected each other. I suddenly understood why I enjoyed coming to work. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was participating, living, building. I looked up. "When did this happen?" Linda smiled. "What?" I looked around again. "I like my job." She laughed. "That's generally considered a positive development." I laughed too, because she was right. For the first time in years, I enjoyed my work. Not because of promotions, not because of ambition, simply because I liked being there. The biggest surprise was my phone. At first, I checked it constantly. Messages, emails, notifications, waiting, expecting something. Then gradually, I stopped. I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. Stopped wondering if Rachel called. Stopped wondering what headquarters thought. Stopped caring. Days passed. Then weeks. One afternoon, I realized something strange. I hadn't thought about my old office all day. The next week, I hadn't thought about it at all. The realization shocked me, because for 7 years, that place had been my entire world. Now, it felt like another life. I stopped waiting for messages, stopped expecting explanations, stopped replaying old conversations, stopped thinking about Rachel. Not intentionally. It just happened, like slowly waking up from a long dream. One evening, I stayed late finishing reports. Outside, snow covered the mountains. The entire town looked peaceful. I walked toward the window. The lights below glowed softly. Everything was quiet. No office gossip. No fake smiles. No games. Just silence. And for the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt comfortable. I looked at my reflection in the glass, then paused. Something seemed different. I looked healthier, less tired. I smiled more, laughed more, slept better. I barely recognized myself. Then I realized something surprising. I wasn't simply living in a new place. I was becoming someone new, someone calmer, someone happier, someone who no longer built his entire identity around people who didn't value him. And the strangest part? I didn't even realize it was happening. I just kept waking up every morning and feeling a little lighter than the day before. Winter arrived early in the mountains. Snow covered the roads. The air became colder. And somehow, I had never been happier. The branch continued growing. We completed another successful quarter. New clients signed contracts. Our team expanded. Even headquarters started sending congratulations. I found the whole thing slightly amusing. For years, headquarters barely remembered this branch existed. Now, they suddenly couldn't stop talking about us. One morning, I arrived at work carrying coffee. Linda looked up from her computer. "You have fans." I frowned. "What?" She held up her phone. Headquarters called again. I laughed. "What?" She shrugged. "They wanted to talk to you." I almost smiled. Interesting. For 7 years, I had been easy to ignore. Now, everyone wanted my attention. I sat at my desk, turned on my computer, and noticed my phone vibrating. Unknown number. I ignored it. A minute later, another call, then another. Finally, a message appeared. "Rachel, can we talk?" I stared at the screen. For a long moment, I simply looked at her name. Months ago, seeing her message would have changed my entire day. I would have replied immediately. Called back. Wonder what happened. Now, I simply put my phone down, then continued answering emails. An hour later, another message. "Rachel, please answer." Then another. "Rachel, it's important." I looked at the screen, then at the mountain outside my office window. Snow covered the trees. The sky looked peaceful. I smiled slightly and ignored the messages. The next day, the calls continued. First Rachel, then coworkers, then former managers. Apparently, headquarters had problems. Big problems. I learned everything accidentally. A former colleague called repeatedly. Eventually, I answered, not because I cared, because curiosity won. "Hello." The man sounded relieved. "There you are." I smiled. Apparently. Silence. Then, "We need you back." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Need me?" "Things are bad." "How bad?" Silence. Then, "Really bad." I waited. He sighed. "Projects are failing." I said nothing. "Departments keep fighting." Nothing. 3 managers resigned. Interesting. And 2 more might quit. I leaned back in my chair. For some reason, none of it surprised me. I remembered headquarters clearly. Politics. Competition. Hidden resentment. People protecting themselves instead of helping each other. Everything looked stable until pressure arrived. Then everything collapsed. The man sighed again. "The office became boring after you left." I almost laughed. Boring. That was apparently my legacy. I smiled. "I'm sure you'll survive." Silence. Then he asked quietly, "You really aren't coming back?" I looked out the window. Snow continued falling. The mountains looked beautiful, peaceful. I thought about headquarters, then about my little branch. The answer came easily. "No." Silence. Then, "I understand." I hung up. My phone vibrated again almost immediately. "Rachel." I looked at her name, then placed my phone upside down. I didn't answer. The next few days became almost ridiculous. Calls, messages, emails. Even Ethan contacted me. Apparently, the world had officially become strange. His message was surprisingly short. I owe you an apology. I stared at the screen. Then another message appeared. Things aren't going well here. I smiled slightly. Apparently not. I put my phone away. No response. Nothing. 3 months ago, I probably would have answered. Now, I simply didn't want to. One evening, I stayed late finishing reports. Everyone else had gone home. The office was quiet. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked at my phone. 23 missed calls, 8 messages, 5 emails. Most were from Rachel. Please answer. Can we talk? I need to explain. I miss you. Please. I read them slowly, then put the phone down. For a long moment, I thought about her, about us. 3 years together. The apartment, the plans, the version of me who believed we would eventually get married. I smiled sadly, then realized something. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I simply didn't have anything left to say, because some conversations happened years too late. Rachel wanted to talk now. Now that headquarters was struggling. Now that I was happy. Now that I wasn't available. But where were these conversations before? When I stayed late every night. When I felt invisible. When Ethan humiliated me. When she laughed. Silence. That's what existed back then. And sometimes, silence changes things permanently. My phone rang again. Rachel. I watched it vibrate. Then stop. A moment later, it rang again. I looked at her name. Rachel Morgan. Once, that name meant everything. Now, it felt like seeing a book I had already finished reading. I didn't hate her. That was the strange part. I genuinely hoped she was okay. I hoped she found happiness. I hoped life worked out for her. I simply no longer wanted to be part of it. The phone stopped ringing. The office became quiet again. I placed my phone inside my desk drawer, then looked outside. Snow continued falling. The mountains remained peaceful. I smiled, because for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to call. I wasn't checking my phone. I wasn't hoping for explanations. I wasn't wondering if someone would finally understand me. I was simply living. And honestly, that felt better than any conversation I could have had. So I turned off the office lights, locked the door, and walked home, leaving every missed call exactly where it belonged. Unanswered. 6 months later, Rachel arrived unexpectedly. I was reviewing reports when someone knocked on my office door. Come in. The door opened. Then I froze. Rachel stood there. For several seconds, I honestly didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different, because she looked tired, exhausted, older somehow. Stress changes people. The confident woman I remembered seemed smaller, quieter, like life had been heavy for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Then she smiled weakly. Hi. I blinked. Hi. Silence again. She looked around my office. Small desk. Simple furniture. Snow-covered mountains outside the window. Then she looked back at me. You really stayed. I laughed softly. She still sounded surprised, as if she had expected me to return eventually, as if this entire experience had been temporary. I leaned back in my chair. I did. Silence. She looked out the window. It's beautiful here. It is. She smiled sadly. I didn't believe you'd actually leave permanently. I looked at her. I know. She lowered her eyes. Because that was always the problem. She never believed I could leave. Never believed I could choose myself. Never believed my absence could become permanent. People become careless when they think someone will always stay. I stood. Have you eaten? She looked surprised. No. Me neither. A small smile appeared. Are you asking me to dinner? I thought for a moment. I think I'm asking if you're hungry. For the first time, she laughed. It sounded strange, like she hadn't done it in a while. An hour later, we sat inside a small restaurant near my apartment. Nothing fancy. Wooden tables. Warm lighting. The owner knew my name. Rachel noticed. You come here often? I nodded. The food's good. She looked around. You seem settled. I am. Silence. A waiter brought tea. Neither of us touched it. Finally, she spoke. Headquarters changed. I smiled slightly. I heard. She sighed. No. She looked tired again. I mean, everything changed. I remained silent. She continued. People left. More silence. Projects failed. Nothing. The atmosphere became terrible. I listened quietly, because strangely, I wasn't curious. It no longer felt like my company, or my office, or my life. It felt like hearing news about a place I once visited. She looked at me carefully. You really don't care anymore. I smiled slightly. No. Silence. That answer seemed to hurt her. She looked down at her tea, then suddenly asked, "Are you happy here?" I looked around. The restaurant owner was arguing with his wife about decorations. Someone laughed near the kitchen. Snow fell softly outside. I smiled. Very. She stared at me, then looked away. I don't think she expected that answer. Maybe she thought I was lonely. Maybe she thought I regretted leaving. Maybe she thought I was waiting for an excuse to come back. Instead, I looked content. And somehow, that seemed difficult for her. Dinner arrived. We ate quietly. Then we talked about ordinary things. The mountains, the weather, work, books. Hours passed. The conversation felt strangely comfortable. Like meeting an old friend. Not an ex-girlfriend. Not someone I once planned to marry. Just someone I used to know. Eventually, the restaurant became almost empty. Rachel looked out the window, then whispered, "I've been unhappy." I looked at her. She smiled sadly. I don't know when it started. Silence. Maybe I always was. I said nothing, because some confessions don't need responses. She looked at me, then asked quietly, "Were you unhappy?" I thought carefully, then nodded. Yes. She looked surprised. You never said anything. I almost laughed. Neither did she. Silence stretched between us. Then, she asked the question I knew was coming. Did I make you unhappy? I looked at her. For a long moment, I considered lying, then decided not to. Sometimes. She closed her eyes. A small, painful smile appeared. I thought so. Silence. Then she looked at me. Her eyes looked tired, honest, sad, and suddenly, she said it. I miss you. Silence. The restaurant seemed to become very quiet. For years, I waited to hear those words. Years. I wanted her to miss me. Wanted her to choose me. Wanted her to realize my value. I imagined this conversation 100 times. And now, it was finally happening. She looked at me hopefully. I looked at her, then at the snow outside. Strangely, the words felt empty. Not meaningless. Just late. Like receiving an apology after you've already healed. Like finding an umbrella after the storm ends. I smiled sadly, because once, those 4 words would have changed everything. Now, they changed nothing. Rachel looked nervous. I know I probably shouldn't have said that. Silence. But I do. More silence. I miss talking to you. She swallowed. I miss having dinner together. Her voice became softer. I miss us. I looked at her quietly, then realized something unexpected. I believed her. She wasn't lying. She really did miss me. The problem was, she missed the version of me who stayed. The version who waited. The version who accepted being second. That man no longer existed. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Rachel waited for an answer. I looked at her, then smiled gently. For the first time all evening, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And somehow, it wasn't what either of us expected. Rachel stayed in town for 2 days. The first day passed quietly. We walked through the town, visited a small cafe, talked about ordinary things. Nothing emotional, nothing difficult. Almost like we were avoiding the conversation waiting for us. Because both of us knew it was coming. The question, the real question, not about work, not about headquarters, not about the transfer, about us. On the second evening, we sat on a wooden bench overlooking the mountains. The sunset painted everything gold. The snow-covered peaks looked endless. Beautiful, peaceful, the kind of view that makes people honest. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel finally asked, "Why didn't you come back?" Silence. I kept looking at the mountains. Because honestly, I had asked myself that same question months ago. Why didn't I return? The answer seemed complicated at first, then surprisingly simple. I smiled slightly. Because I became happy. The words left my mouth quietly, but they hit her harder than I expected. Rachel looked hurt. Actually, hurt wasn't the right word. She looked devastated, because that wasn't the answer she wanted. She looked down, then back at me. You weren't happy with me? Silence. A cold breeze moved through the trees. I thought carefully, because after everything, I still wanted to be honest. Not cruel, just honest. Finally, I shook my head. I wasn't happy with who I became around you. The moment those words left my mouth, I saw it happen. Something inside her broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, because she knew it was true, and so did I. I looked out toward the mountains, then continued. You weren't a bad person, Rachel. She remained silent, but I slowly became someone I didn't like. Tears appeared in her eyes. I kept speaking. For years, I had never said any of this aloud. I stopped having opinions. Silence. I stopped setting boundaries. More silence. I stopped choosing myself. Rachel lowered her head. I smiled sadly. I built my life around making everyone else comfortable. I looked at her. The company. Silence. My co-workers. Silence. You. A tear rolled down her cheek. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply telling the truth. The truth neither of us wanted to face. For years, I gave everyone pieces of myself. My time, my energy, my patience, my attention, my dreams, little by little, until there was almost nothing left. And the strangest part? I didn't even notice it happening, because sacrifice feels noble at first. Then, eventually, it becomes your entire identity. Rachel wiped her eyes. I never asked you to do that. I nodded. I know. She looked surprised. I mean it. I smiled softly. I know, because she was right. She never demanded it. Not directly. But relationships aren't only built by what people ask for. They're built by what people allow. And Rachel had become very comfortable receiving everything while giving very little back. Not intentionally, just gradually. The same way I became comfortable disappearing. I looked at the sunset. The sky was turning orange, then red, then purple. Beautiful. Temporary. Like most things. Rachel's voice trembled. I loved you. I nodded. I know. Silence. Then why does it feel like you're blaming me? I thought about that, then shook my head. I'm not. She stared at me. I'm not blaming you. Silence. I'm taking responsibility. That seemed to confuse her. I smiled. Because I chose that version of myself. I looked down at my hands. I chose to stay quiet. Silence. I chose to ignore problems. Silence. I chose to accept things I shouldn't have accepted. Rachel's eyes filled with tears again. For the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She wasn't arguing. She was listening. Really listening. Maybe for the first time. I laughed softly. You know what's funny? She shook her head. The transfer wasn't what changed my life. She frowned. What was? I looked at her. The prank. Silence. The prank showed me the truth. Her expression fell. Because she remembered. The fake transfer order. Ethan's laughter. The office watching. Her smile. I wasn't angry anymore. But I would never forget it. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed everything. Respect. Value. Priority. All exposed in a single moment. I looked toward the mountains again. If that prank never happened. Silence. I probably would have stayed. Rachel closed her eyes. A tear slid down her face. Because she understood. The thing meant to embarrass me ended up saving me. The thing meant as a joke became a doorway. The thing she dismissed changed everything. For both of us. The sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. Darkness began settling across the valley. Rachel looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you ever regret leaving? I smiled, then looked around. The mountains, the town, the life I built, the peace I found, the version of myself I finally liked. And for the first time in years, the answer came without hesitation. No. Silence. Rachel nodded slowly, as if she already knew, as if she had known before asking. Another tear rolled down her cheek. But this time, she didn't wipe it away, because some truths can't be argued with. Some truths can't be fixed. And some truths arrive far too late. I stood from the bench. The last sunlight faded behind the mountains. Then I looked at Rachel one final time. For years, I thought losing her would destroy me. Instead, losing her helped me find myself. And that was the truth she never wanted to hear. Because deep down, she finally understood something painful. She hadn't lost me when I moved away. She lost me the moment I started choosing myself. And by then, it was already too late. The next morning, I woke up early. The mountains were covered in mist. Everything looked quiet, peaceful. I made coffee, opened the window. Cold air filled the apartment. I smiled. This had become my favorite part of the day. No noise, no emails, no expectations. Just silence. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Rachel entered the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept. Neither had I. She stood there quietly, holding a cup of tea, then looked out the window. It's beautiful here. I nodded. It is. Silence. For several minutes. We simply watched the sunrise. Then I heard it. A soft sniff. I looked at her. Rachel was crying. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Tears rolled down her face. Like she had finally become too tired to hold them back. I didn't say anything. Because sometimes, there's nothing to say. She laughed softly through her tears. I didn't think this trip would end like this. Silence. Another tear fell. Then she looked at me. Her voice barely above a whisper. I thought you loved me. I smiled sadly. I did. She blinked. You did. I nodded. Very much. Silence. She stared at me, as if hearing those words somehow made everything worse. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Then why won't you come back? The room became quiet. I looked out the window. The sun slowly rose above the mountains. Orange light spread across the valley. Beautiful. Peaceful. I thought carefully, because after everything, she deserved honesty. I looked back at her, because love isn't enough. Silence. She frowned. I continued. Respect matters. Another silence. Peace matters. She lowered her eyes. Self-worth matters. A tear rolled down her cheek. Because finally, she understood. For years, she thought love solved everything. That feelings were enough. That as long as two people cared about each other, everything else would somehow work. I used to believe that too. I was wrong. Because love without respect becomes exhausting. Love without peace becomes painful. Love without self-worth slowly destroys you. I smiled sadly. I loved you so much that I forgot to love myself. Silence. She closed her eyes. Her shoulders trembled. Because that sentence was true. And truth often hurts the most. She whispered, I never wanted that. I know. I never wanted you to feel small. I know. I never wanted to hurt you. I nodded again. I know. She looked at me, then suddenly asked, when did I lose you? The question surprised me. I thought about it, then smiled slightly. That's the wrong question. She frowned. What? You didn't lose me all at once. Silence. I looked outside again, then back at her. I'd already been leaving emotionally for years. Absolute silence. She stared at me, confused, heartbroken. I continued. Every time I ignored my own feelings. Silence. Every time I accepted being unimportant. More silence. Every time I chose everyone else before myself. Her eyes filled with tears again. I smiled sadly. I left a little each time. She looked like she couldn't breathe. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The prank. The transfer. The silence. None of it happened suddenly. The transfer order wasn't why I left. The prank wasn't why I stayed away. It was simply the final reminder. The final moment that made everything impossible to ignore. I laughed softly. The funny thing is, she looked up. I think I started leaving long before either of us noticed. Silence. She lowered her eyes, then whispered, I really didn't see it. I know. That was the tragedy. Not cruelty. Not betrayal. Blindness. She never noticed. Never noticed how tired I became. How quiet I became. How small I became. Because people often assume someone will tell them when they're hurting. But sometimes, the hurting person becomes so used to carrying everything alone that silence becomes normal. Rachel started crying again. I thought we had time. I smiled sadly. Most people do. They think relationships collapse dramatically. With screaming, arguments, big betrayals. Usually, they end quietly. One small disappointment at a time. Until one day, there's nothing left to save. She wiped her eyes, then looked at me. I wish I had noticed. I nodded. So do I. Silence. The sun climbed higher. The mist slowly disappeared. The mountains looked clear again. Rachel took a deep breath. Then another. Finally, she smiled. A sad smile. I think this is goodbye. I looked at her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled too. I think it is. More silence. Then she surprised me. She stepped forward and hugged me. Not tightly, not desperately, just gently, like saying goodbye to someone she once loved very much. I hugged her back. Because despite everything, I didn't hate her. I never did. After a moment, she stepped away. Tears still filled her eyes. But somehow, she looked calmer, like she finally understood. Not everything, but enough. She picked up her bag, walked toward the door, then stopped. She turned around one last time. I hope you're happy. I smiled. I am. She nodded slowly. Another sad smile. Good. Then she opened the door and left. I stood there quietly, listening to her footsteps disappear. Then the apartment became silent again. I looked out the window, at the mountains, at the sunlight, at the life I almost never had. And for the first time, goodbye didn't feel painful. It felt peaceful, because some people are meant to stay forever. And some people are meant to teach you why you should never abandon yourself for love. Rachel taught me that lesson. Then she left, and this time, I let her go. 1 year later, the mountain branch became the company's most successful office. Nobody expected it. Not headquarters, not the board, not even us. Yet somehow, the forgotten branch in the mountains had become the company's highest performing office. Profits reached record levels. Employee satisfaction became the highest in company history. New projects arrived constantly. The branch everyone once considered punishment became the place everyone wanted to transfer to. Life has a strange sense of humor. One snowy morning, I sat inside my office reviewing reports. There was a knock. Come in. Linda entered. She looked unusually happy, which immediately made me suspicious. What happened? She smiled. You should sit down. I laughed. I'm already sitting. She handed me an envelope. I opened it, then blinked, then read it again. Promotion. Regional Operations Director. I looked up. She was grinning. Congratulations. I stared at the letter, then laughed. Actually laughed. Because if someone had shown me this letter a year ago, I would have thought it belonged to someone else. Me? Promoted? Leading multiple branches? Impossible. And yet, there it was. I looked out the window. Snow covered the mountains. The same mountains everyone once pitied me for moving to. I smiled. Funny. Sometimes life rewards you in places nobody wants to look. The promotion changed many things. I bought a small house. Nothing extravagant. Just enough. A porch, a tiny garden, a fireplace, large windows facing the mountains. The first night I moved in, I sat on the floor because my furniture hadn't arrived yet. I drank coffee, watched the snow fall, and smiled because it finally felt like home. Not temporary, not borrowed. Mine. I built friendships too. Real friendships. The kind where people remembered your birthday because they cared. The kind where co-workers became family. Friday dinners, weekend hiking trips, board game nights, simple things, ordinary things. The kinds of moments I used to sacrifice because I thought work and relationships required giving away pieces of yourself. Now, I understood something different. Life isn't built through sacrifice alone. It's built through balance. For the first time in years, I had one afternoon, my assistant knocked. Mail for you. I thanked her. Most of it was routine. Documents, reports, advertisements. Then I noticed one envelope. No company logo, no return address, just my name. I frowned, then opened it. Inside, there was only one sheet of paper. One sentence. I wish I had taken your feelings seriously. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. No request. No apology. Just one sentence. I didn't need a name. I knew. Rachel. I read the sentence again. Then again. Silence filled the office. A year ago, those words would have meant everything. I wanted understanding. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted someone to finally say, I see what happened. I see how much you gave. I see how much I overlooked. Now, I simply sat there quietly, then smiled, because regrets always arrive late. Not because people are cruel, because understanding usually comes after loss, after consequences, after silence. I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside my desk drawer, then stood. I walked toward the window. Outside, snow covered the mountains. Employees laughed downstairs. Someone was throwing snowballs. Another person was trying unsuccessfully to avoid them. I smiled. Life looked peaceful. Not perfect, just peaceful. And suddenly, I understood something important. The transfer everyone considered punishment became the best thing that ever happened to me. The fake document, the prank, the humiliation. At the time, they felt like disasters. Now, they felt like directions. Because sometimes, the worst day of your life quietly becomes the beginning of your best one. I remembered Rachel standing outside my apartment. "You'll come back in a month." I smiled. She genuinely believed it. Because everyone did. Nobody understood. Not even me. I didn't leave because I was angry. I didn't stay away because I wanted revenge. I left because something inside me finally woke up. I finally realized I deserved better. Better friendships. Better boundaries. Better treatment. Better peace. And most importantly, I deserved to matter in my own life. I had spent years making myself smaller, quieter, less important, giving pieces of myself to everyone, keeping almost nothing, until one fake transfer order forced me to ask a simple question. What if I chose myself instead? That question changed everything. I looked outside. The mountains seemed endless, beautiful, silent. Home. I smiled, because after all this time, I finally understood something. Walking away isn't always losing. Sometimes, walking away is how you survive. Sometimes, walking away is how you heal. And sometimes, walking away leads you exactly where you were always supposed to be. I picked up my coffee, watched the snow fall, and smiled again. Rachel thought I accepted the transfer because I was hurt. The truth? I accepted it because I finally realized I deserved better. And after I left, I never came back. Because sometimes walking away isn't losing everything. Sometimes it's finding yourself.